Before I begin this story, I would just like to say that I live in a big college town, so posting and responding to Craigslist ads looking for roommates is completely normal. This takes place last Thursday night. My best friend, Katie, was looking for a roommate as she lived with her mom and wanted to move out as soon as possible. She posted an ad on Craigslist looking for a one-bedroom or a room for rent with roommates. A guy about our age, 22, texted her, telling her that he and his girlfriend were about to have a room for rent in their town home as their other roommate was moving out. Excited and surprised at the affordability, Katie agreed to meet him and check the place out. Since she's not an idiot, she brought our good friend Damon with her. They met this guy and the neighbors, and Katie decided that she really liked him and the place, but needed to get another opinion. Later that night, Katie called me and asked if I wanted to go back over there to meet this guy. She told me how cool he was, and how much we all have in common. I agreed. I texted my boyfriend who was at work at the time to let him know where I'd be just in case. We arrive at the apartment, and I'm pretty much instantly drawn to this guy. He had great energy, and was overall very sweet. His girlfriend worked across the street, and came over for a few minutes on her break. She was very sweet too, and I recognized her as one of my friend's sisters. She went back to work, and we continued talking and laughing with the guy and his neighbors. The guy had made a comment about him and his girlfriend, and how they used to be into orgies and things like that. Katie and I, however, are not into such things. We left around 3 a.m. so I could go back to pick up my boyfriend from work. The next night, Katie asked me if I wanted to go back over there to hang out, have a few drinks, and get to know his girlfriend a little better. Once again, I agreed. It was just the four of us this time, and we were all taking a few shots and had a couple mixed drinks. His girlfriend has anxiety like Katie and I, and ended up having a horrible drunken panic attack. We left shortly after, as it was a bit much to handle and didn't think much of it. Now, my and Katie's favorite movie is Harry Potter. They invited us over on Saturday night to have a Harry Potter marathon, and unfortunately, my boyfriend was at work and couldn't attend. Everything was completely normal, until he put the second movie in. Katie and I were sitting on the floor, and his girlfriend came down to join us for some girl talk and whatnot. Later, he came down to join us. Everything was normal for all of 10 seconds, when he decided to lay across all three of us. He started groping Katie, and she started groping me. Katie and I made it clear that this was not okay. Being pinned under the girlfriend, I wasn't able to get up as she's much bigger than me. She begins to put her hands down my pants and insert her fingers as I'm trying to get up and tell her to stop. He gets behind his girlfriend and begins to have sex with her. Katie and I are trying to stand up, and he finally says, "Oh, I'm sorry, are you not comfortable with this?" We tell him we were never comfortable with it, and we need to leave. He lays down next to us as we gather our things, and begins masturbating. All the while his girlfriend is trying to pull us back down, and tackles Katie and begins groping her. We finally break free and run out of the house. The next day, we filed a police report for sexual assault, and are still waiting to hear from a detective. The moral of the story is, don't look for roommates on Craigslist, and don't trust people just because they seem nice.
When I was about 12 years old, my biggest accomplishment at the time was to be alone at home by myself. My brother was staying at a friend's house, and my parents went to dinner with their friends. I was never scared of staying home alone. I enjoyed it a lot. I have a very vivid imagination, but this was something completely different. There were no outside influences to scare me, and I was just watching something normal on TV. Our old house was a split level. We had a wall on the north side of the den that had the entertainment center. On the left of it were the stairs that led to the basement. Then the left of that were the stairs that went to the second floor. Our couch, which I was sitting on at the time, was against the wall on the east side of the den close to the stairs. As I was sitting on the couch watching this show, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was at the very top of the stairs in the unlit hallway. I literally just felt a chill down my spine. I turned my head to see this very tall, dark man standing at the top of my stairs looking down at me. I say man because it didn't have any hair, and I believed it to be an actual person at the time. I couldn't even make a sound or anything. I jumped up from the couch and ran towards the kitchen. We had this bar-type counter that came out of the wall on the southwest corner of the den that separates it from the kitchen. I grabbed the phone and ducked down behind it. I immediately called my dad. At the time, I thought it was a burglar in my house that was going to kill me. My dad could tell how scared I really was, and he rushed home immediately. That was the longest 10 to 15 minutes of my life. It felt like I was waiting for hours, thinking at any time this man was about to come around the corner and kill me. As soon as my dad got there, he checked the entire house. He couldn't find anyone, and thought I made up the whole story. I couldn't sleep by myself for a few months after that, because he was standing right outside my bedroom. I thought it was some type of evil spirit out to get me. I never saw it again, but I always felt something watching me while I was trying to sleep. I used to pray every night for God to put a ghost blanket over me so that nothing could touch or harm me while I was trying to fall asleep, and also while I was sleeping. I know it sounds weird, but it gave me comfort as a child so that I could fall asleep without fear of something trying to get me. We moved out of that house a year later, and I never had those types of feelings again. It wasn't until then that I realized it wasn't just some childhood fear of ghosts, but that you can actually feel the presence of spirits or ghosts. It churns my stomach every time I think about it. I'm not sure if it was an evil spirit or just one that liked to watch over me, but it certainly scared me. If I had to give an accurate description of the man, I'd say he was about 6 foot tall, black figure with dark baggy clothes, little or no hair on his head, and I couldn't see any other facial features. It was almost like a shadow or something, and I could feel his eyes, but I couldn't see them, if that makes any sense.
This story happened when I was about 17 years old, and my friend at the time was 16. I'm 24 and she's 23 now. We're both female. One night we were at my parents' house, which is basically small town USA, and we decided to go for a walk around my neighborhood. It wasn't too late, but it was starting to get dark. It was maybe around 9 or 9:30 p.m. There were a few houses being built in my neighborhood at the time, so we decided to go explore the inside of one. On a side note, I've always been a bit paranoid and just naturally cautious, but my friend was the wild, rebellious one of the group. We entered the house through the garage area because there wasn't a door, and the house was basically a frame with a few walls. I stayed near the entrance because I was getting really bad vibes, but my friend decided to go further into the house. About 2 or 3 minutes into our exploration, I heard moaning sounds coming from the half-built stairs. I asked my friend if she heard it, and she said no, and kept on looking at stuff. That was when I saw a very large man stand up on the stairs and start to walk down them. I grabbed her, screamed, "Run!" and we bolted out of there. I refused to look back the entire time because I was too scared to see if he was running after us. Once we got to my house, we ran inside and locked the doors. Nothing else happened that night. The next weekend, the same friend was over at my house again, and we were sitting outside on my trampoline at about 1 a.m. We were talking about random shit when she just stopped mid-sentence and went pale as a ghost. When I asked her what was wrong, all she said was, "We need to go inside right now." While we got off of the trampoline, she never took her eyes off the spot of my yard she was looking at. Once inside, I asked her what the hell that was all about. She said someone was in my backyard, sitting by my mom's flower bed, 15 feet from the trampoline. The person was on the ground, rocking back and forth while staring at us. My mom and stepdad were already asleep, so we didn't want to bother them. Instead, we made sure all of the doors and windows were locked, and that there was a weapon by the door if it came to that. After we calmed down, we went down to the basement to my room and started watching some movies. The street lamp was shining through the little window in my room, and I shit you not, there was someone walking back and forth in front of my window. At this point, we were so scared we decided to wake my stepdad up. He went outside and didn't find anyone. Nothing happened again for a few weeks until one day I was home by myself and kept getting weird phone calls on the landline. It was a guy with a really deep voice, asking how I was doing and what I was doing, and if my parents were home. I hung up on him every time without answering. About 20 minutes after the last phone call, I heard a loud crashing sound in my basement that scared the fuck out of me. That was about all I could take. I pushed our couch against the basement door, grabbed a butcher knife, and noped the fuck out of there to my neighbor's house. Luckily, her dad was home and called the police. When the police got there, I told them everything that had been happening, and they checked out my basement. Someone had popped out the window in my bedroom, and it shattered all over my bed. There was no one in my basement, and nothing has ever happened since. So terrifying stalker guy, let's not meet again.
A few miles from where I live is a county park. It's a lovely place with a wide range of different trees, plants, and wildlife. People often picnic there, take their children to play in the playgrounds, or simply explore. It's even been nicknamed Little Switzerland by locals because of its clay cliffs, which are dotted around the place. These cliffs mean that the park is on a multitude of different levels. Some are accessible via slopes and steps, but some are not. It's on one of these inaccessible cliff tops where we witnessed something we could not explain. Almost 2 years ago, my girlfriend and I had decided to take an afternoon trip to the county park. We had been at university all morning and wanted to be outdoors for the remainder of the day. It was an unplanned trip, but we hoped to walk around the woods and have a late dinner at the county inn. We must have been walking around the park for an hour or so, exploring the woods, identifying birds, and enjoying our surroundings. We had reached a quarry situated in the middle of the park. It had flooded a considerable amount, so we walked around it. I had previously visited the county park a number of times, and I remembered seeing what looked like the remains of a huge old house on one of the largest cliff tops. I knew my girlfriend would find this as interesting as I did, so I made an extra effort to find it. We eventually reached a gravel pathway at the foot of the highest cliff. There is no way up without climbing equipment, but it winded around the cliff's perimeter, thus enabling us a perfect view of the above remains. We must have only walked this path for 10 minutes, if that, and I saw what I had been looking for. The remains included an old brick wall on the very edge of the cliff top, and what looked like brick archways, with wrought iron bars and no windows. It doesn't really resemble a house anymore, but I have reason to believe it was at least part of the grounds, which I'll explain later. I walked a few feet ahead of my girlfriend, so I could point up to where these remains were, as they were pretty well hidden amidst the trees. I turned to look at my girlfriend for a split second before looking back to where I was pointing, and it was in that moment I saw it. Exactly in line with what I was pointing at was something I can only explain as a creature. It was on a natural edge created in the cliffside, just feet below the remains we had searched for. The ledge was overgrown with ivy and the odd tree here and there. It was very green up there, and this made what I saw contrast with its surroundings quite considerably. It was a creamy/peachy color and looked like the shape of a head, but it had no redeeming features. Although describing this reminds me of how scared I was looking at it, it's the way it moved which made my blood run cold. It seemed to be lying down, peering over the edge of the ledge I described. It must have been looking at me because when I turned my head back to where I was pointing, it moved backwards into the overgrowth. It did not move like a human. It skulked back effortlessly. Like I said earlier, it was impossible to get up there without climbing equipment, and if anyone was up there, you would see them, despite the overgrowth, as the ledge was not that big. Also, if a person was hiding and peering over the edge, their facial features would have been way more visible. This did not have any, or at least it appeared not to. Not to mention that most people would probably have moved in a clumsy manner and would have still been visible. Whatever was up there was not fazed by me seeing it. It moved with confidence. In a slow movement, it faded away into the ivy. It looked like it may have been slightly bigger than a human being. Another reason why any facial features should have been visible from that distance. It was not a silhouette or anything. Not what I would describe as ghostly or entity. I could see it as clear as day, but it was not human, or like any other animal I've seen. Needless to say, I immediately asked my girlfriend if she had seen what I had, but she did not. I described what I had seen and we both fled the woods as fast as we could. We had to carry on walking the same gravel path, as it was enclosed between the cliff and the sloping woodland. This left me startled and intrigued. I had been to the county park a number of times before and never encountered anything like that. I decided to do a spot of research and found some articles about this house called The Cliff in this county park. There was only ever one person living there, and they were explained as having a split personality, both a woman and a man. They are rumored to have spent their time drawing pictures and hanging them on a gate to their property for passers-by to see. Another house was also explained, which sounds very much like the remains I described, even the location. An old gate to a huge garden is supposedly hidden in the ivy on top of that cliff. It is said to lead to an old period house, which was once an orphanage.
My name is Shane. Here's a bit of background. I'm from a small town called Wigston in the city of Leicestershire, England. And my town is a small community, so I know pretty much everyone in my town. This is relevant later on in the story. Now, on to the main story. I was home alone as my mom and dad were out on their honeymoon in Manchester. As my parents are huge Manchester United fans, they wanted to see the Manchester United Stadium, and they also found a nice cabin to get away from reality. Now, I was 17 at the time, so it was no big deal to me because I had been home alone loads of times before. They only just recently got married, so I didn't mind being home alone because everyone is entitled to a break as soon as they get married. All was well as I was listening to my music on my MacBook and playing along to songs on my guitar in my bedroom, upstairs next to my mom and dad's room. We have a bathroom that's opposite of my room, so as soon as you come up the stairs, my room is the first thing you see. The next thing I know, I hear a car pull up onto our driveway. Now, our driveway is rather small, and if you were to stand in the living room, you could see the front of the house, as we have a large four-sided bay window. So I went downstairs and peeked out of the window, just out of sight as I was hiding behind the brown curtains we have. There was this old-looking man who seemed to be in his late 30s or early 40s. He was driving a green Ford Fiesta, but I thought nothing of it as I was expecting a parcel delivery that day. Sometimes in our town we have some private deliveries, so it all seemed normal. When he got out of his car and started walking towards our door, I noticed there was no parcel in sight, so I found this a little weird. So my doorbell rang and I went to the door and slowly opened it and said, "Yes?" He said, "Hello, I'm a friend of your dad's. He asked me to come check up on you while he was away at work. My name is Jim." I knew my dad was away on his honeymoon with my mom, so red flags went off. I said, "Oh, well, I'm fine. Thank you. Bye." "Aren't you going to invite me in?" He said this in a disturbing tone, so I said, "No, I have a lot of things to do and I'm very busy. I have to go to the store and get some things." He huffed and said, "Okay, maybe next time." And he walked back into his car and sped off. As soon as he left, I called my dad and told him about the situation. My dad said he's never heard of anyone called Jim in our town before, and he thought it was kind of funny because he thought the man must have got the wrong house or something. But I just felt sick because I nearly believed him, until he said that my dad asked him to check up on me while he was at work. I remember having shivers run down my spine. I shrugged it off after this as I just told myself that he had the wrong house. So I went back upstairs and put my music on to try and forget about what had just happened. But I was shaken up for the rest of the day. As soon as it hit 11 p.m., I was fine. I almost forgot about the creepy guy from earlier, so I tried to get some sleep. Until I was woken up by smashing glass. I panicked and looked out of my bedroom window. I could barely see anything as it was pitch black outside. But in the corner of my eye, I could see the car headlights with the full beamer on. And finally, for what felt like minutes, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. And what I saw made me have a feeling of dread wash over me. The hairs on my whole body stood upright. It was that same green Ford Fiesta from earlier, and this creep was inside my house. I could hear footsteps coming from downstairs, so I called the police and grabbed my multi-pocket knife tool. I used it to restring my guitar. I waited and waited until I heard footsteps coming from upstairs, and he started pushing my door open. As soon as his foot was in my door, I ran and pushed all my body weight on the door and crushed his foot. He let out a heart-wrenching scream, so I knew he was in pain. As soon as I opened the door, I saw him on the floor, so I kicked him in the face and booked it out of there and waited in a big bush on the other side of the road of my house. Finally, to my relief, the police showed up and entered the house. They must have been in there for 10 minutes, but they finally arrested that punk. He was hiding in my wardrobe with a bread knife that he took from my kitchen. They also found some rope and some duct tape. The police told me that there have been many reports of this guy telling young teens that he is a friend of the family and he would try to kidnap them for ransom. He has been wanted for a while for very similar crimes. The police also told me that I was very lucky and that I did the right thing. They called my mom and dad, and they were on their way back as soon as they heard. So, creepy guy who broke into my house, let's not meet again, because next time it will be so much worse for you. I still keep my pocket knife next to my bed when I sleep.
This is a story that my friend D told me when I was in China for vacation 2 years ago. I was visiting family members, and D was a pen pal I had made prior to going there, since I didn't know anyone there that could speak English. Anyways, D told me that when he had first moved to Shanghai, China, he found a really cheap place to stay that was close to his new job. The room he had rented was on the 3rd floor of an old house, in which everyone had their own floor, and the kitchen, living room is all on the ground level. The owner of the home was this old woman, and her bedroom was on the 1st floor, and another woman was staying on the 2nd. When Dee began to move in, the old woman told him not to use the closet in his room. She said it was dirty inside and had some missing floorboards, so it was not a good idea to put his stuff inside. The closet had been boarded up with some planks of wood. Dee agreed to that and just used the closet in the hallway instead. After 2 weeks, he said that he had too much stuff and it was inconvenient for him to go to the hallway all the time to get certain things that he needed. Plus his room was small, so he decided to remove the boards from the closet. He was going to get some paint and pick up some tools and see if he could fix up the closet himself. When he removed the boards and opened up the closet, he found some old clothes, which he threw away, and saw that there was nothing wrong with the closet at all. He moved all of his stuff inside. One day, he said he came home from work and was going to shower and change before going out again for the night. When he went inside his closet to get a change of clothes, he saw that all his clothes had been tossed around and wrinkled. He had them neatly folded before. He got really angry and assumed that maybe the roommate's daughter had been playing in his room and messed it up. When he asked the lady who lived on the second floor, she said that her daughter had not been over and she was told not to go upstairs anyway. He decided to ignore this for now. Another time, he said he was taking a steamy shower and suddenly felt a chilly gust of air blow into his bathroom. His window and door were not open, and there are no vents either in his bathroom. He said he would also see a shadow of a human silhouette in his shower curtain every now and then. He realized that there was the possibility of ghost activity, but doesn't believe in that kind of stuff, so he just ignored it. One night, Dee and 2 of his friends went out for the night to party. They stopped by Dee's house for a little bit to have a cup of tea before leaving. He was in the kitchen browsing the cabinets to find out where the tea bags were. He usually places them in the pantry next to the stove, but he said that they weren't there for some reason. He thought maybe his roommates might have drank it all. While he was searching, he said out loud, "I wonder where the tea went." Suddenly, one of the cabinets slammed open and 2 boxes of tea bags just flew out onto the floor, as if someone had thrown them. Both of his friends started screaming and got up and left. Dee said he packed his stuff that night, slept in the living room, and moved out 2 days later. The old lady got very angry at him for opening the closet when he told her why he wanted to move out. She said this wouldn't have happened if he hadn't messed with it.
Yesterday morning, I was unfortunate enough to suffer a power cut, and spending my day in total darkness isn't something I enjoy. I ended up wandering around town throughout the day to kill some time. After spending a few hours at my old university, I decided I should get a hotel for me and my dog, as the power outage was expected to last a few days, and we live in the South where no AC can be a big issue. I finally managed to find somewhere nearby that will book me and my pup without costing us a few arms and legs, and that's when everything started to go downhill. I would need a cab from my old school back home, then to my hotel. Everything's within 3 miles of each other, and I figured it would be simple. I wasn't aware that there was a late graduation ceremony going on, so every time I tried to call a cab, they wouldn't show up, or someone else would take them. When the sun was starting to set, I found someone who was a previous classmate of mine. They gave me a ride home, and I packed my stuff up. I called another cab, and lo and behold, it didn't feel like coming. And since Uber wasn't working, I decided I would take my bag and my pup and myself and walk my happy butt the mile or so to the hotel so that we could have a good rest. I started walking about 1/4 of the way there. I hear something behind me. Enter my nightmare. A 6-foot-something brick house of a person with a grisly look about them. They looked up and down and said, "Hey there, girl. Where are you going?" Now, let it be known, I'm new to this area, and I'm from the middle of nowhere, and this is horrifying to me. I decided my options were to be incredibly polite, or to run screaming, so I fell back on politeness. After rejecting him taking my bags multiple times, he stated he was walking to the place right next to my hotel, so I decided I would humanize myself as much as possible and keep a dialogue going between us. He asked me questions about my family, friends, why I was here. I made a bit of a story that I had a family and was here for a graduation, so that it seemed like I had people who would know I was expected. Shortly after this, he reaches into his pocket and says, "You might need this," as he hands me a small knife. Not knowing what to say, I thank him a few times. Moments later, he's talking to himself before looking at me and inviting me to live with his niece and her boyfriend. Internally, I am screaming. I know I could do nothing. This guy has at least 1.5 feet on me, and I am exhausted. We continue walking, and he tells me he gets a good vibe from me, and he could see us in a relationship with a family. He keeps muttering to himself about tons of people, girls. It was very hard to make out. He then looks at me and says, "I had epiphany." I realized he meant an epiphany, but that was how he said it. And I said, "Oh?" He just smiled and did a head shake and kind of chuckled to himself, muttering, "Good night, good night." I figure it's alright, we're about halfway there, and I'm holding a conversation listening to how he went to prison for 2 years over a gun, and how Snoop Dogg dedicated a song to him. We get to a very dark part of the walk, and he looks at someone walking towards us and pushes me to the side of the sidewalk that's away from the street and says, "You walk here now, 'cause you're mine now, little girlie." Suddenly, people walking to their cars in graduation walk past us. I feel safer, and I know I'm home free. As we approach the hotel parking lot, he asks if he can join me. I make up an excuse about how it's only booked for one person and it's not in my values. He follows me into the lobby. He follows me to the front desk. I'm told I can't stay because I'm 20, not 21, and they had a recent policy change. My heart sinks. He is attached to my side, and I can't tell anybody I'm terrified. I see a worker at another desk, and I say I'm going to the bathroom. I whisper to her, "Please, can I talk to you somewhere? I'm in a small emergency." She escorts me away, and I explain that he's been following me. She has me sit down, and he's trying to talk another person into using their ID for what he's now calling our room. A woman employee walks over and says, "Do you know this girl?" And he replies, baffled, "Yeah, this is my girl. We know each other for years." She looks at him and asks my name. She my girl. She my girl," he says. She tells him if he doesn't leave the lobby, police will be called. It ends up that she's a bartender. She sits me down and ended up helping me get my room, and I fully intend to thank her and the other woman properly. After an hour sitting in the bar and her negotiating my stay, she looks at me and says, "If you wouldn't have been able to stay, I would have paid for you or taken you home because he's still out there. He's still been outside on and off since this morning. So good vibe, knife man. Although you're determined to try, let's not meet again."
This was recent. Just last week. I took my trusty sidekick Faith on a walk around the heliport. I live around 12 minutes away, and it's a healthy 3-mile jaunt along a dirt trail. We were walking at a fast pace, and my dog was sniffing along the fence that borders the trail. The next part is kind of disgusting, but it's true. We find dead pig carcasses in the brush, and I think with all the cookouts taking place island-wide, pig leftovers get tossed all over the island. Not sure why they don't want to bury them. My dog and I find at least 2 a day. It's not an odor you want to smell. I get really annoyed when a trade wind pushes that smell into my face. Even the dog wrinkles her nose. It's pretty potent. On this specific day, I was as happy as one can be. The day was a sunny 84, and the humidity was low. My skin was warm to the touch, and my leg muscles felt strong and fluid. It was a good day. But that was about to change. My dog was ahead of me, about 10 steps away. when she jumped away from the large brush she was investigating. I figured it was probably a feral cat. They grow really big here, and Faith is barely an 11-pounder. She ran to me like her backside was on fire, and I laughed at the look on her face. She turned around for me to pick her up, so I obliged, chuckling at her shivering little body. "Nothing to be scared of, silly dog," I whispered into her ear. I could tell she was looking at me for answers, so I put her on the ground nearest the fence and told her to stay. I didn't have to tell her twice. She hovered low to the ground, her eyes staring intensely at the scary brush ahead. I walked over, looking for signs of any movement. I didn't hear or see anything out of the ordinary. It was a bush, nothing more, nothing less. As I was about to call the dog over, though, I saw a big black bag. It was another step or two when I saw the first jawbone. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Opening the bag a little wider with my foot, I saw it was filled with other bones. It was then that I heard the cows. It was horrible. I could hear one of them being slaughtered. Having the ability of second sight, I see stories unfolding in my mind's eye. I could live without being shown this one. Images of cows being hammered in the head with metal bars filled my mind. I could hear the crushing blows on their throats as they collapsed onto corral fencing. The sounds of their skulls caving in was not a pretty sound. It was horrible. I guess I was being shown how this bag full of bones, cow bones to be specific, had come to be here. I hate seeing the scenes of death, but the next part I do like. Ghostly apparitions were appearing before me. It was the slaughtered cows. They say that animals don't have souls, but they do have a type of living energy that moves on after death. I could see them standing around, staying together in a large group. The ghostly cows seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. I could hear faint animal sounds coming from them. They seemed to be talking to one another, probably asking each other what just happened. It didn't take long before I saw the outlines of human-like entities entering the space where I stood. I stepped away from the scene unfolding and watched as an ethereal being peered into the plastic bag in the bushes. He or she, I couldn't tell, but this beautiful being angel ghost with shepherd duties, and then more of them appeared. They seemed to be herding the cow apparitions into groups. The ethereal beings carried large staffs. I knew it. They were ghostly shepherds. I could see the landscape behind them and through them. I stood still and watched. It was fascinating, and this was a first for me. Talk about timing. To be there as they gathered the animals. I was in awe. These ghostly people/shepherds were all dressed alike. They wore simple white shirts and tunics, and pants. It looked like some sort of tie was around the waist, and it looked to be twine-colored, but I wasn't sure if it was rope or a belt of sorts. Remember, ethereal beings show us what we will be most comfortable with viewing. These shepherds looked a lot like Christmas picture postcards and Bible stories of my youth. This caused me to smile. In return, I did receive a soft smile from one of the ghostly beings. It was very clear. They were here to gather up the ethereal cows. I watched until they were out of sight and had faded away. Then I walked over the bag of bones. I tied off the bag and carried it with me. It was heavy and cumbersome, but I got it back to my truck. Okay, I know they were only cow bones, but it was something I had to do. I took that bag of bones and drove to a beautiful hillside. I dragged out my shovel, which I kept in the truck, in case I get stuck while off-roading, and buried those bones up there. I stood back and looked over the valley below. I couldn't have picked a prettier place to bury those bones. I looked down at my dog, and she seemed to approve. Her little face looked almost joyful. Okay, maybe I'm just reading something into her expression, but I felt good. The cows? I guess they were romping along in some ethereal pasture. You're wondering about the pig carcasses? Yes, I now bury them where they lay. Blessings, Ghost Seer.
First, let me give you some background. In my late teens and early 20s, I used to go to China every summer to volunteer as an English tutor. It was a great experience. I made a lot of friends and was really challenged to grow into a more mature, responsible individual. I generally went wherever the agency found a space for me, so I ended up seeing a lot of different cities and towns in China. My last 2 summers were in a coastal city in the deep south. This city has always been a major port with a massive international trading community, and along with Beijing and Shanghai, it's one of the most important economic centers of the Midlands East Coast. As a result, a lot of foreigners come through and stay on business. Even so, most foreigners stick to a few neighborhoods, so if you're a foreigner outside of one of those neighborhoods, you still stick out like a sore thumb. With that being said, my agency placed me with a primary school in one of the less cosmopolitan suburbs, which was fine by me. I was used to working in really rural situations, so being so close to a bustling major city was a nice change of pace. Even so, as the weeks went by, I began to notice that something was a little bit off. I'm a pretty stereotypical white American woman, and even in a place as big as this city, I still was pretty easy to spot, especially since I seemed to have inherited my Irish ancestors' deathly pale, untannable skin. To give you a better idea, I'm fairly short, and without makeup I tend to look a lot younger than I actually am. I was used to working, as I said, in rather rural Chinese towns, where life is fairly quiet and peaceful. Other than people noticing how obviously foreign I was, most folks left me alone. As a result, in my first gig in this city, I was super relaxed. But then I started realizing that I was being noticed, not so much by the locals, but definitely by the international businessmen who were visiting or staying. As the weeks progressed, I increasingly had to deal with them chatting me up, leering at me, and making loud comments about how nice it was to see a white woman. It got pretty creepy, but nothing ever seemed to come from it. I could generally handle myself and tell them where to stick it if they got too fresh. That is, until one night. One warm evening, I was in my fairly peaceful suburb central shopping area. I met up with some local Chinese friends. We all had dinner together and had a great time laughing it up. It was a late dinner, so it was already totally dark out by the time we finished up our meal and said goodbye. They went one way, back to their apartment, and I went the other to return to my host family's apartment. Even though it was late, the brightly lit market street was bustling, everyone out enjoying the relatively coolness of the evening after another hot, humid day. I knew I'd be home alone, so I stopped by a booth selling cheap DVDs, figuring I'd watch a movie while I waited for my host family to get home. That's when I felt a presence just behind my right shoulder. I looked up from the stack of DVDs to see a man, obviously a foreign businessman. He had a shaved head, and one side of his face was horribly scarred. He was grinning at me, and his eyes were cold and predatory. I felt a shiver of fear go through me that I hadn't experienced before with anyone else in this city.
"You were so beautiful,"
he said in a deep voice. I didn't know what to say, so I just stammered out, thanks.
"Do you want to go to a bar?"
I shook my head. No, I'm just going home, thank you.
"Can I have your number? Your email? I want to get to know you.
He pressed.
You're so beautiful.
Sorry, no, I'm not interested, I said as firmly as I could, putting down the DVDs I'd been looking at, and turned to go, walking as quickly as I could through the crowds towards my host family's apartment complex. I don't know what it was, but some kind of spider sense told me that I was not alone as I walked. After a minute or so, I glanced cautiously over my shoulder, and as I'd feared, I see him only a few paces behind me. The turnoff street to my apartment complex was coming up. My heart was pounding. I knew I couldn't go that way because the turnoff street was almost totally dark with barely any street lights. I also really didn't want this creep knowing where I or my host family lived. I ducked into the very last shop before my turnoff and pretended to look at bottles of soda and ice cream bars. The shop, being a corner shop, had a large door on each outward-facing side. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him pass by the door I'd walked through, and then turn the corner to pass by the door on the other side, slowing his pace and lingering, his eyes on me. He slowed his pace and seemed to stop just beside the opposite door, as if waiting in the shadows for me to emerge. I pretended to ignore him, going behind a stand of shelves and pulling out my phone. Hesitantly, I speed dialed my friends who I had just had dinner with. "Please come meet me," I hissed into the phone. "There's a man. I think he's following me. I'll walk back towards you and you walk towards me." Fear in their voices, they agreed, and I hung up but kept my phone clutched tightly in my hand. Slipping back out the same door I'd come in and hoping he wouldn't see me. The market street was still busy and bright, so I was pretty certain that the man wouldn't try anything as long as I stayed on that street. Hesitantly, I walked back towards where I'd left my friends. We met up halfway between their apartment and the corner store, and they grabbed my hands in fear, asking, "Who's following you?" And just then, he passed by, pretending to walk past us and go down the street in the direction they'd come from, as if he were just casually out for a stroll. He clearly followed me back, and when he saw I had friends, pretended to be minding his own business and gave up. As soon as I saw him, I felt like I was about to faint, and my friends must have seen the look on my face because they immediately knew it was him. Each of them took one of my arms, and they hurriedly walked me the whole way back to my apartment, glancing over their shoulders to make sure they weren't being followed. Thankfully, he really did seem to have given up. One of my friends called my host mother and told her the situation, and my host mother had her two eldest children leave the event they were attending to keep me company and keep a lookout at the apartment. I couldn't stop shaking. I was certain every time I looked out my window that I'd see the man wandering around outside the apartment complex. Soon after that, my friends invited me to stay at their apartment instead, since it was by the more well-lit and busier market area, and just in case the man had actually located my host family's apartment. Thankfully, I didn't see the scarred man again that summer, but as I said before, I spent 2 summers in that city. This was only the first. The second summer I was there, I worked at a different primary school, but it was on the other side of the same neighborhood, right next to a hotel. I stayed with a new host family for the first half of my summer, and then because of some long and convoluted reasons I won't go into here, I stayed in the hotel for the second half, which was pretty convenient because all I had to do to get to the primary school was walk out the back door of the hotel and across a big parking lot. That, and the hotel had cable and free internet, which my host family didn't have. I was pretty happy with the situation, even if it meant living on my own and paying a little extra. One night, towards the end of my time tutoring at that school, I was out late again, doing a little shopping for little gifts to bring home for my friends. I hadn't had as many creepy interactions this summer, and I had dismissed the previous summer's weirdness as an unusual incident and had put it almost totally out of my mind. After a nice evening out, I walked home. The hotel had a back entrance. As I've said before, facing the primary school and opening out onto a large parking lot, the front entrance of the hotel was facing the highway. Since the back entrance was closer to the shopping area than the front entrance, I generally used the back entrance to go in and out. That night, as usual, I headed up the road leading to the hotel's back entrance. I began to cross the parking lot towards that bright rectangle of light, and that's when I saw him. Standing between me and the steps to the hotel entrance, right in the middle of the parking lot, was the tall figure of a man. I squinted, taking a few steps closer, and then froze. In the light from the hotel, I could see a shaved head and a half-scarred face. I felt my blood run cold as recognition from the year before hit me, and at the same time, my heart started pounding through my chest. I clenched my purse tightly, ready to run.
"Do you remember me?"
he said, smiling that same predatory smile, the light barely illuminating his eyes. Stunned, I nodded and rasped out a, "Yes?"
"I've missed you,"
he said.
"Do you want to go out sometime and get dinner?"
I glanced between him and the door. If I said no, would he let me pass? Could I make it inside in time if I ran for it? There was no way to hide where I was heading now. It was obvious that I was staying at that hotel. All I could hope to do was get inside and deadbolt my room's door. After a moment of consideration about what to do, I nodded, trying to look confident. "Sure, okay." I lied. I definitely had no intention of going to get dinner, drinks, or anything else with this guy.
"Can I have your phone number? I really want to get to know you."
"I'm sure we'll run into each other again soon," I assured him, voice shaking as I edged, keeping as much distance between me and him as possible. Around the outer part of the parking lot and towards my salvation, that bright, warm door.
"I'm sure we will,"
he said with a knowing smile, and then told me his name and asked me for mine. I don't even remember his name now. I was too frightened to concentrate on that. It was Carl or something similar. I lied again, giving him a false name, all the while edging towards the door, my eyes never leaving him. As soon as I was at the hotel steps, I bolted. I ran inside to the front desk, continuously glancing behind me. In broken Chinese, I described the man to them and told them that he was following me, and asked them to please not reveal my room number to him. Concerned and more than a little confused, they agreed and told me that they'd let me know if he came asking around about me. I thanked them and rushed to the elevator, but I didn't even remotely feel safe until I was locked and deadbolted in my little hotel room. I laid down on my bed in shock, shaking and crying a little. I still have no idea if he was staying in that hotel and we ran into each other by chance, or if he'd somehow seen me, figured out where I was staying, and decided to wait for me. Thankfully, I only had a week left at the school before it was time to pack up and go home to America. Unfortunately, there was no way to get to the primary school without walking through or at least passing by that parking lot. So every time I passed through, I would look around in terror. I'm glad to say that I never saw the scarred man again, and I haven't been back to China since. If I ever do go back, I'm still not sure I want to return to that same suburb. Hopefully, I can convince the tutoring agency to send me somewhere else. Sometimes, I wonder if I was overreacting during those 2 summers. Maybe the man just happened to be in the same location I was. Maybe he wasn't following me at all. But then I remember that predatory smile and the coldness in his eyes as he said he wanted to get to know me. I know that whatever was going through his head was not pretty at all. Being a young woman all alone in a foreign country, I'm sure you could understand how frightening that kind of situation would be. Anyway, creepy scarred man, if I return to China, let's not meet again, or anywhere else for that matter.